I really went back to this as a very basic principle of the immune system because I wanted to highlight something. As we progress and we get more sophisticated with our means of selection of T cell receptors, their characterization, how we build them into TCR recipient cells, how we modify those cells, then I wanted to return to the basic principle that so much of the activity of a TCR-T is governed by this essential tripartite interaction of the peptide, the HLA molecule, and the T cell receptor. And nature really put 500 million years of evolution into how these things work. So, of course, what you really need is a peptide that gives you the specificity, of course, when it's presented by a given HLA molecule. But that interaction has to be stable enough and prominent enough that that peptide can win what I call the inside-out race. In other words, it's got to fight against, in a tumor cell, fight against all the world of self-peptides that are also wanting to find their place in the HLA molecules and in the processing machinery. And that's a very complex cellular process that the cell controls very stringently. And so you have to have enough of the antigen, but that antigen binding to the HLA has to be prominent enough that it can win that fight and put enough of itself on the cell surface that it can be visible to a T cell receptor. Now, if that's a really good interaction, it brings a second advantage, and that is when the TCR-T will kill some tumor cells, you can get release of antigen. And if those are really good peptides, they can bind to non-tumor cells in the tumor microenvironment. And that's the process we call cross-presentation, that you can have that pickup. And now those other cells that don't have the tumor antigen, they become visible to the TCR-Ts. So that's the basic fundamentals that you would like to achieve in terms of the peptide MHC expression on the tumor cells and then in the tumor microenvironment. Now you combine that with the selection of the T cell receptor. Let's say the tumor is really overexpressing its antigen, so it may not be such a challenge to find good T cell receptors that can see their ligands on the tumor cells. But a real advantage in a solid tumor setting is that they can also see those minimal amounts of antigen that's being cross-presented by, let's say, macrophages or mesenchymal suppressor cells that you can then get your T cells directed to working against or modulating the function of those neighbors. And that's really dependent that this cross-presentation occurs, that MHC peptide interaction is strong enough. Now, what do you need your TCR-T to do to really make that modulation in the tumor microenvironment? Killing capacity, we want to take out the tumor cells. We want a good cytokine capacity to modulate the tumor microenvironment and change, let's say, an M2 macrophage that's immunosuppressive into a pro-inflammatory cell type that can support the whole eradication of the solid tumor. And what we have learned, because we have a high throughput discovery engine for TCRs, so that we gather actually hundreds of clones and dozens of unique T cell receptor sequences, all to that same peptide MHC complex. And then when we really deep dive on those cells functionally, we will see that those T cell receptors, when we put them into the identical recipient T cells, will reprogram those recipient cells to have different cytokine profiles. And that's really related to the signaling that goes through that each individual T cell receptor that sustains the cytokine signaling programs in the cells. And what we have learned is that you really want to concentrate on high levels of interferon gamma. Those are really dramatic molecules in the tumor microenvironment because they can have direct impact on some tumor cells, causing senescence and dormancy and apoptosis and inhibition of metastasis, but they also can reprogram these stromal cells, which are then contributing to a lot of the really bad characteristics in a tumor microenvironment. So that was how I wanted to play between that peptide-HLA interaction and then the interaction of the T cell receptor, and that has to do with the peptide sensitivity. It's got to be enough to get that reprogram or to get that programming that you want to get Th1 cytokines and high levels of interferon gamma. You still want to retain the kill, but you don't want those interactions to be so strong that the MHC peptide complex will drive your TCR-Ts into exhaustion or apoptosis. It's this right off and on, and that's nature has been so clever in titrating these interactions that we really try to take advantage of that simple tripartite interaction.